Now we come to the final talk. The whole reason for having this reunion is this talk. Basically, as I mentioned earlier, Les said, I'm not getting any help from anybody to preserve and kind of continue this legacy thing in the Y3K project so that all the data that we have is available 1,000 years from now. So we talked, and we think there are systems and organizations that can be built that will make sure that the data can be available 1,000 years from now. There are a lot of other people that are interested in the same problem, including all the, whether it's Google or digital libraries, and a number of people. So once we start it, I think a lot of people will take over.
Thank you. I was scheduled to start talking at 4:30. I think we're a little behind schedule. Okay, we'll go over some of this somewhat faster.
4 minutes, guys. 4 minutes. 100 years.
Okay, we make the point that SAIL's been operating in a digital environment for more than 45 years. All of the early records have been lost because of problems of recording and preserving them. I'll get into that a little bit. But since 1972, we have been archiving. Librarians have advocated that everything go onto paper because that can be preserved. It can last for centuries. But it's not very accessible compared with websites, for example, and it still is subject to fire, earthquake, war, voracious bugs, and and if you make multiple copies, which is what you would need to make that work, then it gets very expensive. Current digital recording problems, we mostly use magnetic recording, which is good for maybe a decade, and it starts going bad. Evolving software causes file formats to change over time, so if you've got an old file, you don't have any way of reading it or doing anything with it. Evolving hardware keeps changing, which further complicates it. Therefore, older records generally cannot be read. Why bother? We think that SAIL research deserves to be preserved. There's a lot of good stuff. I won't go into all of this. Most of you know what was going on there, all this stuff. There were a number of technology firsts. Display-based time-sharing system was the first anywhere in the world, I believe. Thor, which became Zeus. Putting bitmap displays on everyone's desk, we were, I think, the first in the world. Computer-aided design system you just heard about, which was a great leap forward that influenced a lot of companies. Spelling corrector that you heard about. Computer-controlled vending machine that allowed you to buy on credit. And if you were a gambler, you could go double or nothing. I noticed there was a cultural difference. The musicians were mostly gamblers and the other people were not. The document compiler, you've heard about Pub and Tech, which was very good at math. Social networking, you heard a little bit about. Finger, that was an accident. Corporate spin-offs, there was a little company called Microsoft. Now that's a kind of indirect spin-off. Dick Gruen, who was here, is he? Oh, okay, he and Steve Russell, who you heard from a little bit ago, and Bill Weir all migrated up to Seattle to run a time-sharing service using a DEC 10. And they also carried on the tradition that we had at SAIL of allowing bright high school students into play. And two of those were Billy Gates and Paul Allen. That was how they got introduced to computing, and it somehow put them into a profitable career. Let's see, when Park was formed, a bunch of people migrated there. Alan Kay, Dan Swinehart, Larry Tesler, I don't know, there was others probably. And some of the sale culture went with them. Desktop publishing systems using laser printers, I stuck my nose into that, helped found Imogen, which was very educational about vulture capitalism. Computer-aided design, Valid Logic used SUDS and some other software they had developed. Computer workstations, Sun Microsystems was a very direct spin-off. They had developed the original Sun workstations at sale. What's that?
Using SUDS.
Using SUDS, true. Internet routers. Cisco I list as a spin-off. It was actually more of a rip-off. That is, they swiped all the technology that they needed without a license. Eventually, Stanford gave them a sweetheart deal.
Are you going to write the book you promised?
Someday. I have to make enough on the book to hire lawyers to right. Music synthesizers, you heard about John Chowning's invention that made quite a nice bundle. And you've also heard a bit about public key cryptography, which led to the formation of RSA. And then you've heard a little bit about the Sale Dart archive, done principally by Bruce Baumgart. Turing Awards. They are generally recognized as the Nobel Prizes for computing, and since 1966 they've been awarded annually. Of the recipients, 1/3 had ties to Sale. That's quite extraordinary. There's nobody else anywhere near that, either a group or a university. I have a personal interest in archiving. I have family genealogies going back about 5 centuries, although they're kind of sexist. They follow family names, which means the male line. They don't tell us about the women going back, which is kind of silly because you generally know who your mother is. You can't really be quite sure who your father was. So I'm going to extend that in a different direction. I have diaries of my mother, who lived quite a rich life. She became a very popular stage actress as a teenager, was invited to Hollywood, decided instead to become a school teacher and raise 2 kids while getting a PhD in her spare time. And then she became a college professor and head of her department. And she wrote diaries her whole life. May do something with those. I have family photos going back 150 years, home movies going back 75 years, stories I've written that my children and grandchildren seem to enjoy. My great-grandchildren are now reading. I'm hoping that I can hand them off to my great-grandchildren, who with a bit of luck will start appearing in 15 or 20 years. I don't know how many of them there will be. There's currently no practical way of preserving this stuff, but I think it can be done. Archiving isn't easy. The early storage was all paper, punched paper, tape, and cards. And one of the things I did early on to make this spelling checker when I was at MIT in 1961 was to punch in the 10,000 most common English words on paper tape, and there it is, 7 reels. I still have it.
We can still read it.
I think so. Anyway, I brought that here when I came, and we used it to do the first spelling checker, and then Ralph, I think, expanded it some, adding some words for the better one that he did. However, if you use punch paper tape or cards and reread them a lot, they wear out. So, whereas they can be good long-term archiving schemes, you can't use them all that much. Magnetic tape or floppy disks didn't last long. Here's a picture of the deck tapes that we first started out using on the PDP-6, which are small magnetic tape drives. Archiving at that time was an individual responsibility, and therefore we have no archives.
Read the old deck tapes on?
What's that?
Do you have anything to read the old deck tapes on? I still have one in my office.
Yeah, I've got some too.
That's not something.
I don't know of any surviving deck tapes.
I was kidding. There's a group that's actually interested in PDP-11s, and I assume that I gave them a bunch of deck tape readers, and I bet you they still can read them.
Contact Al Coslow at the Computer History Museum.
Okay, there you have a clue. This is our first disk system, Libroscope disk, that you heard a little bit about. Cabinet was about 7 feet high, 12 feet long, 3 feet deep. Disks were 5 feet in diameter, mounted on a horizontal shaft. We were told that it was very susceptible to vibration, so instead of putting it on the false floor, we excavated and mounted it on the steel I-beams of the building. That turned out to be not all that important for a reason I'll get into. The cost was about $330,000, the capacity 50 megabytes. That was the state of the art. However, we discovered that a temperature change of about 1 degree was enough to make it start forgetting. And since our computer room had originally been designed as a cafeteria, it had lots of outside windows, and we had 2 air conditioning systems that fought each other, so we couldn't use it. We ended up suing Libroscope. Well, actually, by that time they'd been bought out by the Singer Sewing Machine Company, and so we sued Singer. And as usual, the only people who made out on that were the lawyers. We then decided to scrap them, but it occurred to me that the discs would make nice coffee tables. So we auctioned them off. I got one, and so did some other people here. Here's my living room with a Libroscope disc. You can notice it's a bit discolored.
How expensive was the coffee table?
How?
Expensive with the coffee table.
Oh, we calculate that it cost about $10,000 each to make, but we auctioned them off for $125 to $140. Curiously, the ones that were most scarred drew the highest prices, and the most scarred one is upstairs in the lobby here. We preserved that. But anyway, in case you wonder why this is so discolored, I discovered that the nickel plating, which was the magnetic material, is somewhat soluble in alcohol. Okay, the sailed art chronology, we added reliable magnetic disks in 1971, I believe, and started using a program written by Ralph Gorin called DART, started backing up and archiving the files.
How long will they last?
What was that?
How long will they last?
The tapes?
Oh, they didn't last. That's okay. That's why we had to. Martin copied them in the 1988 to 90 period because we knew, and some of the files were lost in the process because of dropouts, magnetic dropouts. Then, still later, 1997, 98, we converted the tapes to SCSI disks, and the expanded files took 53 gigabytes, tiny amount by modern standards, horrendous amount by the old-time standards. And then Bruce Baumgart created the archive in 2006 for general access. How can these files be preserved? Well, you can think about a commercial operation such as Google, a nonprofit corporation such as archive.org, government agencies, or universities working together. I reject commercial corporations because they've got to dedicate themselves to the bottom line. And when it becomes cheaper to trash it, it's gone. Even a relatively benign corporation like Google. Archive.org has been doing an excellent job of preserving the web, but if it's like most such activities, it will eventually run into financial problems and probably go out of business. That's my guess. Government agencies, don't trust them. They'll try to censor, but politicians will get involved. It's no way to do it. Universities, on the other hand, are dedicated to collecting and preserving information. And I think that they provide a solider base for doing this kind of thing for the long term. Because some of them will disappear, but others will continue. And if you have some kind of a consortium that can work together, there's a good chance of preserving things for the long haul. What is needed? We need low-cost memory. It's already here. It's getting cheaper. Worldwide network. Well, we've got the internet. An organization for distributing files worldwide for backup and getting them copied to the new media. There is an organization called LOCKSS. That stands for Lots of Copies Keep Stuff Safe. It's a bunch of libraries, including Stanford and CMU and hundreds of others around the world. Their policy is to make 7 copies of everything and keep them going that way. If one of them gets wiped out, make another copy somewhere. This has been in operation for some time. I didn't know about it until a month or so ago when I stumbled across them.
I've been in touch with these people.
Well, I am now too. And they're kind of interested in this problem of archiving for the long term. What else is needed? We need a fee structure that fairly charges for services and distributes income equitably among participants. That's a toughie.
0.
Well, a scheme for ensuring the integrity of records. We want to have digital signatures on everything so that we can check that nothing has changed. And then, since there are multiple copies, you can cross-check them against each other to make sure they're consistent. So that's something that falls out of the LOCKSS system. Programs for translating old file formats to new ones as needed. Well, that's somewhat challenging. File formats keep changing. At least if you've done one translation from an old format to a newer one, and then a still newer one arrives, if you can write a translator from the newer one to the newest one, you can cascade them. You don't have to start from scratch. So, what's that?
Maybe lossy in the process.
Maybe lossy?
Each step loses information.
Shouldn't, if it's done right.
You have the original.
Okay, we also need emulators for extinct computers.
Yes, that is happening as well.
Yeah, that's fairly straightforward, though complicated. But it's doable.
Those old computers are very simple.
Yeah, it's easier to resurrect computers than it is people. Okay, well,
I'm working on the Lester Earnest simulator.
okay, a current toughie is translation between modern languages. Now, there is considerable progress being made on that, and I expect it'll get better over time, but it's not yet a solved problem. So this is kind of a weak link for now. If you think ahead 1,000 years, if there's anybody speaking a language called English then, they won't understand anything we're saying now. It will be a completely different language. As you know, if you look back at Old English, very hard to understand. And that's only like, 500, 600 years old, something like that. So this will require ongoing work to translate from older languages to newer ones as they arise. But people are getting better at this, so there's a chance of making it work. Okay, who can do it? I think an augmented LOCKSS or a new organization that uses LOCKSS preservation and pays for it. It could be sort of grafted on. I'm not sure politically what will work out best. So that's it.
So the issue